Hey there, it is Faith Talk Live. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
Hey, what about this rock star we're watching on YouTube and also the Facebook, right? Stephen Scoggins has quite a story from homeless to multimillionaire. Love that studio, Stephen.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate hanging out with you guys. No, I'm excited to be with you.
You have quite a story. And I don't know where to begin. Maybe from the beginning. Here's a line I'm going to read. I'm just going to throw this out here. He found faith at a litter box.
Yeah.
You go from there.
Oh gosh. Well, I'll tell you what. So I had this interesting discovery that about 3 years ago, Time Magazine did a Harris poll on people that felt unfulfilled and like they weren't living a life of meaning. And it was about 67% of the American population. And that was obviously before COVID.
Wow.
And ironically, when I started digging into that particular thing, many of the people that would fit in that category had difficult upbringings of some way, shape, or form. And I was no different. I grew up in a broken home. Parents got divorced really early. At around 9 years old, my grandmother kind of moved in and began taking care of myself, my little brother, and then my father and my mother, unfortunately, were chasing their own identities for a while. And, you know, it was kind of interesting because everything seemed to be like perfect and it was really good for a while. And then one afternoon, my grandmother comes to me and I'm like 9 years old. I remember like it was yesterday. I literally had a G.I. Joe in one hand and a Transform in the other. It was Snake Eyes and it was Bumblebee and Snake Eyes was winning, right?
Do you still have those? That's what I want to know. Do you still
I don't still have those, but I do have little Wolverine dolls.
Okay. All right.
Dude, you can make some money off those, the G.I. Joe and stuff.
Yeah, I wish I did. Remember back in the day, the Transformers, I mean, I know it's a side note, squirrel, but
sure.
You know, the original Transformers made out of metal.
Yeah.
You guys remember that? Yeah. So that was, so now they're obviously out of plastic, but she proceeded to kind of tell me that she was going to need my help around the house. And of course, if you think about the average 9-year-old, there's not a lot of mental acuity there.
Yeah.
A lot of ability to process. I mean, your brain isn't even fully developed based on what science says. And I just remember looking at her eyes and watching some tears kind of well up in her eyes and kind of one or two fall from her cheek. And she just says, I really need your help. And I'm like, okay, Nanny, whatever you need me to do, kind of scenario. And of course, I'm sure I was talking in more of a baby voice than anything else. I didn't have any kind of some bass to my voice, but
you didn't have a beard back then.
Yeah, right. No beard. I actually had hair then too as well. It's kind of funny. I look like Kevin Arnold from the Wonder Years.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
I had the full-fledged mullet. I even had a rat tail once. But
nice.
Hey, mullets are coming back, by the way.
That's right. It is. It's funny how these trends keep kind of coming back and forth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But my grandmother, grabbed an old pleather black chair, pulled it over to the tan stove, right across the old 70s style linoleum. It was like orange and green and white and a little star, whatever. And she taught me how to basically begin to make meals, but doing so with boiled water. So learning how to make mac and cheese, learning how to make oatmeal, boiled hot dogs, pretty much anything you could boil or pour milk into, she taught me how to do. And then she taught me how to set an alarm. And I would get up about 5 or 5:30 on most mornings. And I would go wake my little brother up. I would feed him a cereal, right? We would kind of get dressed and then we'd walk the 3 or 4 blocks to school. And of course my grandmother would be up and coherent when I was up. It wasn't like I was just doing it in the dark. But she was, she had a really tough time moving because back in the 80s specifically, the cancer that she was diagnosed with was almost as dangerous as the actual chemotherapy that she was ingesting.
Wow.
Right. So the chemotherapy back then wasn't really good.
Right.
So the mortality rate and everything wasn't super high. I think she knew that she wouldn't be with us much longer, but she did fight hard. She fought for almost 2 years, and around the age of 11, she passed away. And, at 9 years old, obviously that's the first time I can remember ever stepping into if it's to be, it's up to me kind of mentality. Like I'm going to have to help and serve. That mentality kind of followed me throughout the course of my entire life. And around 11 years old, when she passed away, my mother and father kind of come back into the picture. My brother goes to live with my mother down in Florida. I then go to live with my father in a small town called Fuquay, North Carolina, or as we like to say, North Kakalaki. And we were in a mobile home right beside a cow pasture. And, I just waking up at 5:30, hopping in the car. And that's when I got introduced to the construction industry. And that's also when I got introduced to my very first mentor, or a man that would become my mentor, almost like a father figure, a lot like my father's father figure. not that my grandparent, my grandfather, my father's father, actually survived Pearl Harbor and the whole deal. But as a result, I believe, this is before PTSD was a thing, right? So, I believe he medicated with alcohol, because he would, when he would get intoxicated, he would give you war stories, and they were very descriptive.
Wow.
All that to say that alcoholism in my father's side of the family was pretty prevalent. And I remember around the age of maybe 13 years old, having my first one-on-one interaction with Steve Mark was his name, my dad's employer. And where I said, well, he said, well, hi, I'm Stephen. I said, well, I'm Stephen too. And I just thought it was the coolest thing that we had the same name. I just thought it was incredible.
Meant to be.
Exactly. Well, and the crazy part was, as soon as that moment happened, every time that he would drive around the community, which is what he did, right? He was a very, very successful entrepreneur and built homes in North and South Carolina, and very good man. One of the things that I remember most about Steve was he was incredibly gifted at business. I would dare say particular. I watched him kick a police officer off the street one time because he owned the street, and the officer was annoying him. So he said, "You're on my street. You turn around and leave." And the guy turned around, got in his car and left. To give you an honest contrast, he was also one of the most generous people I ever met in my life. I say this all the time because I think it's the best representation of one of the many things that I witnessed, which is watching him literally put $1,000 under a basket of hush puppies at a local barbecue joint and walk out the door.
Wow.
Knowing that a single mother was going to come up and grab that money because the single mother had been waiting on him the entire time, and watch her just get wrecked. Right. And yell, I can pay my light bill, and all this kind of stuff. And I just knew, I didn't know it in the moment, but I just knew I wanted to kind of be like that. Like I wanted to have that level of influence and affluence. And, so anytime he invited me to come hop in his Jeep Grand Cherokee and ride around the community, he wanted to talk to me about stuff, I was like, yeah, I'm down. Plus, not to mention, typically when he did that, it was either really cold or really hot. So I got the benefit of the AC or the heat, and so.
You're a smart man, Stephen.
I thought so. And I don't know. I was probably, I think I had just started driving. So we'll call it 16 or 17 years old. And it was a hot day. I was working on my dad's framing crew. And Steve motions me to come down like he's done 1,000 times before. And he invites me into the truck. And of course, I'm enjoying the AC in the moment. And he says, he goes, I got a question for you. I'm like, okay. He goes, what's the difference between a rich man and a poor man? And I was like, well, duh, money, of course. Mm-hmm. And he just kind of gave me this look, almost like he wanted to pop me in the back of the head. Like, no, dummy, right? He goes, no, it's the way they think. The follow-up question to that is actually what I think started my ultimate transformation, because I had only known, obviously, lack, right? So my dad's first business failed in, I think it was late 93, early 94. And not because he wasn't working hard. The economy tanked. He wasn't in a good position. And it caught up with him, right? So, but I remember him making this comment to me, looking me in the eyes after our house had just gotten foreclosed on. The bank had come and got both vehicles, and we were literally en route, basically to my grandparents' house to basically stay with them. So in theory, to get back on our feet. And he makes this comment. He says, Scoggins don't get ahead, they get by. And, I was probably 16 at the time, maybe. And that really stuck in my soul. So it was kind of interesting timing when Steve pulled me down off the framing crew to kind of give me this conversation, because it was almost like counteracting the choice between different beliefs.
Right.
Right. One of the things that I find with a lot of the folks that I've worked with and had the pleasure of spending time with, everything from, athletes to entertainers to just hardworking people like my dad, like myself, and is this essence of moving through life based on a lie that was either told about you or told within you. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. And my dad's was kind of in that zone. He was the guy that was always borrowing and never repaying. And again, it wasn't that he was a bad guy. He just didn't have great behavior systems based on some of the things that he learned growing up. Right. And Steve, on the other hand, was very affluent, very generous, very hardworking. I had two of the powerhouses of hard workers, like right in my face. And when Steve asked me the second question, it really kind of changed my perspective. And he said, let me ask you this. He says, do you want to learn to be like me, or do you want to continue being like your father? Now, he wasn't hating on my dad. Like, Steve thought of my dad like a son. And I would dare say, knowing the way Steve is or was, he probably spent more time trying to pour into my dad, and maybe it fell on deaf ears. Maybe it wasn't fully understood or whatever. Right. Because I'm very unique in my family currently, as far as my position in life and the things that I'm afforded to do and the blessings God's blessed me with and what he's been doing with my life for a number of years. But in that moment, that was the essence of getting started. So much so that around the age of 18, I had just turned 18. Our financial situation had gone from bad to worse. I was tired of the lights getting cut off and the water getting cut off and all that kind of stuff in a mobile home park which we were in. I chose to drop out of high school, try to get the family car at a buy here, pay here lot, and in theory, rebuild some security. Within about 6 months from there, I moved out on my own and began my journey. Well, within about 8 months of there, Steve kind of basically said, well, why don't you come back to me? I'll put you in business for yourself. And that's essentially what he did. He bought me all the tools and equipment that I needed. He poured into me with knowledge, wisdom, and resource. And, for the better part of a year, I went from basically making no money consistently to making like really, really good money. I'm talking at 19 years old, I'm probably clearing just under six figures. With between bonuses and salary and the other components that he put as part of this initiative to kind of put me in business for myself. Now, granted, he was my only customer, right? So in some ways it was self-seeking and self-serving, but I didn't fully realize this at the time, but I got very cocky, very arrogant, very egotistical, only because when I dropped out of high school, everybody and their brother had told me that I was going to be a failure. You're going to be this, you're going to be that. Right. Nobody had any idea about what my family environment had been and what I was going through and how we were going through it. And hindsight being 2020, I know that I'm not the only one. Right. There are still Americans and people all in all kinds of countries, even today, that are still struggling to get by, not really seeing a full way out, which is part of the reason I do what I do now. But when all this came up, Steve was spending a lot of time kind of like trying to pour into me, but it's almost like my ego had just stopped listening. And within about 6 months of getting started, maybe 8 months, I proceeded to lose everything. And what I discovered was my character was not in a place to withstand the blessing that was on my shoulders. And I think a lot of people make that mistake, right? That you have an early rise and maybe you're like, okay, I'm getting blessed and it's finally time. We're gonna have an amazing. It's gonna be awesome. And you get to the top, you're like, okay, yeah, look at me, I got this. I did good, right?
Yeah.
And that's when my humbling took place. And within 6 months of losing everything, I literally lost everything, all the way to the point of being, call it homeless is the best way to say it. Being without a home. I couch surfed some. I slept in a borrowed friend's cars. I slept outside of just a handful of times, enough to get my attention, to know that I didn't want to be there anymore. And one afternoon I went to a public restroom, where I'd been showering and shaving because I was still having some part-time off and off work. And I just remember looking at myself and like, how the heck did you get here? Like, what in the world?
Yeah. And
some of the things that Steve had taught me were like filtering in the back of my head. Right. And, and that was kind of the start of my major shift. I believe that if you're going to be used in an amazing way via God's grace or God's purpose, that you're going to have to withstand a certain level of crushings. Right. I've been through 3 crushings that I can remember very vividly. One was the litter box. One was the moment I just mentioned to you. One happened in 2017 when I had to remove my entire executive team for embezzlement with one of my businesses. And each of those moments teach you something more about yourself, and they also teach you the dependency you need on something greater than yourself. And I went from praying on my knees to praying literally face down on literally face down, like outstretched, like laying like you're either laying on a beach mat or something, and crying and weeping myself and begging God to just talk to me kind of thing. But the litter box happened shortly after the interaction with the mirror. Shortly after I escaped a suicide attempt at the 440 and Capitol Boulevard Bridge here in Raleigh. And my dad offered me a place to crash. Once they knew I was home, like I said, my wife and other people said, well, what led you to being homeless? I'm like, ego, pride. Like at any point in time, I could have picked up the phone and had somebody to rely upon, but I didn't want to let them know that the golden child that was all of a sudden making it had fallen. Right.
Right.
And as a result, we ended up with a situation where You know, I'm obviously going through a massive humbling, and I'm on my dad's couch, and my brother calls my dad's house phone at the time, right? You know, the old answering machine messages, you know, they actually used to press to put play and stuff like that, right? And, you know, and I overhear his voice is like, hey, I'll give you $50 if you come clean my litter box. I'm like, $50 to clean a litter box. And again, like, this is like late 90s, like 97, right? So, I mean, you know, $50 still actually meant something.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. And, you know, so I agree. I go up to and it's a short walk, right? My brother's living in a mobile home that I technically bought 2 years earlier, but I couldn't afford to make the payments on, right? So he ended up taking over the payments and so on and so forth. But as I walk up the 7 stairs, I open the old, you know, screen door, walk through the door. This massive ammonia smell like hits me right in the face. Like, oh, right. Walk down the old gray shaggy carpet that you'd only see in a single wide trailer, you know, cross the white linoleum, past the blue wallpaper, right? Past the old laminated cabinets that were like, I don't know what they were made out of. I don't even think it was particle board. I think it was cardboard.
Yeah.
Through the cardboard doors, the hollow doors, and then into this thing. And I look over to the left into the master bathroom, and there it was, the litter box, right? And in this litter box, to say it was used would be an understatement. There were Tootsie Rolls everywhere.
Oh, nice.
Most people, you know, the cat steps in the litter box, does its business, kind of almost like wipes its feet off before it hops out of the litter box.
Yeah. Yeah.
For some reason, my brother's way of cleaning the litter box was just pour more sand on top of stuff.
Yeah.
So it was a bit more like
cover it
an ice
up.
cream
That's all you
cone.
got to do.
Yeah. Now, I had heard whispers in my heart and my mind, but I hadn't truly actually identified my heart for God. I was baptized when I was 9 years old, but by the time I went through all this struggle and junk, by the time I got to that litter box, I had spent almost 5 years as an atheist. And when I say an atheist, I mean like not just professing atheist. I mean like proving to myself that atheism was the way. I mean, Darwin and Big Bang Theory and all these different things to prove to myself that God wasn't real and God doesn't care. Because if God was real and he loved me, then why the heck would he tear me down? Yeah. Right. Why wouldn't he bless me? Right. And I didn't realize this entire time he was actually setting me up for a pretty profound blessing. But in this particular moment, I walk in the door, I look at it, I'm like, oh no. I walk out of the room, I go back to the kitchen, I grab a trash bag, not a Walmart bag or a Target bag or any kind of shopping center bag that's, you know, yay big, but a full-fledged trash bag. And I start going at it. And I just, you know, start. And of course, the more I'm doing it, the more disgusted I'm getting. Like the more I hate it, like, oh, this is nasty. Ugh, right. And so I start going faster and faster and faster. And about that time, the corner of the scooper hits this massive clump and the handle snaps off.
Oh.
Right. I go from being frustrated to all out anger. I throw the handle down. I look at it. I think about giving up, but I'm like, I really need the money. Like I really need this $50. And I pick up the scooper. I put my thumb in the back of it and I go back at it again. Right. And this time I'm going faster and harder because I'm like, this is totally disgusting. Yeah. And as I'm doing that, then the corner of the scooper catches the trash bag, rips a 2-foot hole in the bag. Everything goes everywhere. No. And there's a kind of an intentional story here that I think is pretty powerful, but I basically take that scooper, I throw it down on the ground and I start screaming at the top of my lungs, every obscenity, everything I could think of at the ceiling. I mind you, I'm yelling at a God who I quote unquote don't believe in, right? Saying, if you were so real, why would you? So, and I made this comment. I said, well, if you're so real, why don't you prove to me you're so real? And this is where people like, okay, I'm good with the story up until here. And then people are like, this next part sounds crazy. Right. But the reality is it's my life. So it is what it is. It was like somebody took a baseball bat to the back of my knees and I was basically pinned to the floor. And I heard this little whisper. It started in the center of my chest and began to radiate out with almost like you have a heating pad that's been turned on. So it's starting to radiate heat. And it says, are you ready to surrender? And what do you do? Like I'm pinned to the floor. My hairs are on my arms and even on my head at the time. We're standing on ends, right? I was freaking out. Like I was not expecting a response. Let's put it that way. And I just started weeping uncontrollably. And I said, yeah, I'm ready. And it was almost like the whisper said, okay, great. I can bless you now. And then while I'm still pinned to the floor, it was like somebody took a hot vat of honey and poured it from the top of my head all the way. And it just, I like I said, I don't know if it spent 10 minutes or 10 hours. Like it just was all consuming. And it was so like, I felt loved. I felt cared for. I felt understood. I felt clarity. I began to have flashbacks what life could be rather than what life was. I began to hear little things that Steve Myrick had taught me along the way, little things. My grandfather, who desperately pursued me as a person of faith along the way, who'd been calling me his little soul winner since the time I was born all the way to the time he passed away in 2016, including the 5 years as an atheist.
Wow.
It would literally introduce me to people. This is my little soul winner, like this kind of thing. And, you know, and I just remember being at peace for the first time in a very, very long, actually being at peace since the first time since my grandmother passed away at 9 years old. And I got up off the floor and I just remember looking out this little rectangle window that they only have in little bathrooms in the mobile homes. And, you know, this pine branch was just flaming in the wind, just as soft as it could be, a bright blue sky. And then a week later, I was invited back onto my dad's framing crew and worked the week with a nail apron, nothing special. And lo and behold, on Friday, when it came down to get the paychecks, we went over to my dad went over to go get the checks from Steve. And, you know, I'd been hiding from Steve all week because I didn't want him to see me, even though I knew that he knew that I was back because he was paying me. Right. So, and, you know, about the time he's going to get the paychecks and stuff, a little bit before that, I'd been sent next door to reframe a garage door, which is just like the casing that holds the garage door. It was crooked and I straightened it. But while I was there, I was listening to the guys that had taken over from me basically talk bad about Steve. And they specifically were doing siding for him. And I just remember getting irate and really mad. Like, how dare they talk about Steve this way? Da, 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 da. And, you know, as we began to kind of progress, I just remember walking with my house and I just remember that same voice say, isn't that what you did? And I was like, man. But then that made me like even more like fired up in a good way. Steve comes back. My dad's going to get the checks. He comes back with the checks. About this time, my dad's walking this way and I'm walking this way. You see, the guys that we had been listening to had basically said they weren't coming back on Monday if Steve didn't give them money. He'd already overpaid them, and they were into drugs and some other things, and you know, so they were looking for easy money. Well, I go knock on Steve's window. He rolls the window down. What can I do for you, boy? I'm like, well, you know, how's your head? I said, well, it's better now. Okay, cool. Well, what's up? I'm like, well, you know, the guys over here, they're not coming back Monday. Da 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 da. If for some reason they don't come back Monday, can I take back over? He left that. He's like, boy, I'm gonna tell you what. I done took a risk on you once. I ain't doing it again, man. You burned me, boy. You burned me last time. Good old Southern guy, of course. And I said, you don't have to worry about it. He said, boy, you ain't got no tools. You ain't got no insurance. You ain't got no people. How are you going to take back over for him? Because I ain't doing it again. I said, if you'll just give me the opportunity, I will not let you down. Like it will not happen again. And through some back and forth a little bit, he just kind of smiled. He said, I'll tell you what, boy, if they don't come back Monday at 9 a.m., I'll give you a shot. I'll let you at least finish the house. We'll go from there. How about that? Done. Literally smiled at him, shook his hand. He rolled his window back up. I came walking back around the corner. My dad is walking back towards me. He's livid. Like, what have you just done? I just got you back on this framing crew. Are you crazy? Right. I mean, he's like going through all these different emotions. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt like I found my own voice. Right. And I feel like most of us in humanity nowadays, we've been so busy listening to the voices of others, the media and some other things, like all these different components, that we have never spent time to actually figure out what our voice is and what we're called to say, or how we're called to use that voice to serve. And I basically screamed back at my dad and said, you don't understand. This is something I've got to do. You da, 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 da. And for the first time, my dad showed up. He turned around and say another word. He turned around, went back towards the beat up work van, pulled tools out of it, came back over towards me. Now keep in mind, we had just put the tools in the truck, like maybe 40 minutes before. And I'm like, what are you doing? He's like, do you remember what we made scaffolding out of when you were a kid? I'm like, yeah. He says, what was it? I was like, wood, ladders, wood, benches, wood. I'm like, he goes, okay. He says, boy, start pulling trash out of the trash piles. We got scaffolding to build. And we did. I started pulling, 2x4s out of the trash piles and OSB. And we spent the entire weekend building scaffolding, not knowing if I was even going to need it come Monday. I spent my entire paycheck, which was it was under $200. It was $186, I believe it was, renting a brake machine at a rental place, which is just a device that makes the coil pieces that goes on the trim to make it look pretty. And Monday morning, I'm sitting on the curb, 7 a.m. Steve kind of rolls around. What you doing? Well, I'm waiting to get started. Can I go yet? Well, it's not 9 o'clock yet. And we kind of went back and forth that way and kind of messed. I think he was intentionally messing with me the entire time in a good way, right? But at 9:02, he kind of rolls back around. He said, "Boy, what you waiting on?" And I went to work. And that was the first day that my first flagship was company was built. That company is actually the meeting I was just in before we hopped on the call. Is now in several states. I employ a few hundred people, and we'll do high 8 figures in revenue on an annual basis.
Wow.
And that has allowed me to then scale into other things like thought leadership and begin to teach people how to break free from the same junk that I had a hard time breaking free from. So that's another reason I know that my experience with God at the litter box was true.
That's awesome. Stephen, what a story. We would
Wow.
love to have you back. We've got another guest coming up, but we want them to check out your podcast. It's called Stuck to Unstoppable, and you're speaking all over the place. Stephen Scoggins, StephenScoggins.com is a good place to go to. Also on Insta, real quick, what's your Insta?
It's going to be Stephen with a PH _Scoggins. Definitely happy to connect with anybody.
Awesome. All right, buddy. We'd love to talk to you in January if you're up for it.
Yeah, man. Whenever you guys are around, I'm happy to serve.
Thanks for sharing. Good stuff.
Yeah,
right.
great story. You can check out the rest at his Insta there, and also check out the website. We'll be right back. I'm Rick Probst.
And I'm Dan Ratcliffe.
This is Faith Talk Live.